Hello, everybody, and welcome to our Women's Health Innovation Forum series event focused on cognitive and brain health. And really quickly, before I get us started and do some welcomes here today, I just want to quickly say for the best viewing experience for today's event, if you go to your video settings and hide non-video participants, it just makes sure that you're only seeing our incredible speaker lineup here today. And again, just ensures the best viewing experience. And then I also want to just encourage use of the chat. Introduce yourselves, get connected, ask questions. We really want to make sure that if there's anything that you have on your mind that you want to ask our speakers, that we can integrate it into the conversation here today, or they can address the questions in the chat after the panel discussions have concluded. And with that, I want to introduce myself. I'm Alexandra Pateau. I'm a program manager here at Springboard. Springboard is a 22-year-old nonprofit focused on accelerating the growth of women-led companies. And over the 2 decades of programming in the tech, media, and healthcare industries, we brought over 850 companies into our portfolio to join the leading network of influencers, investors, innovators, industry leaders, and titans dedicated to building high-growth companies led by women. And of course, over that 2-decade span of programming, we saw that so many women coming through our programs were focused on conditions that solely, differently, or disproportionately impact women. And so to double down our support of women innovators and broaden that to be women innovators in the women's health space, we launched the Women's Health Innovation Coalition in 2020 to bring together the organizations and individuals advocating for and promoting greater attention to research and investment in, again, diseases, conditions, and indications that exclusively or disproportionately impact women. And so the coalition's framework that we've identified has 7 segments to really broaden our understanding of women's health. And that includes autoimmune, oncology, aging and bone health, of course, gynecological, sexual, and reproductive health, cardiovascular health, and of course, today's event being cognitive and brain health. And so we decided to launch the forum series as a way to bring together the community in each segment of women's health and highlight the women doing work in that space. So of course, 7 segments that coincides with 7 events. This is the timeline for our forum series this year. Of course, today's event is cognitive and brain health, and we have 3 left in the year: reproductive, cardiovascular, and oncology. You'll see the dates for those. So look out for that in our social media and invites to join those. And of course, this forum series, again, is to highlight women doing work in this space. So we'll first hear from patient advocates and those that work directly with women going through the healthcare system, living with the conditions in each area of women's health, and really amplify a key piece of women's health so often overlooked, which is, of course, the voice of the female patient. After that, we'll highlight the founders, entrepreneurs, and funders in this area of women's health, looking at the state of investment in the space, the market opportunity, and really amplify the companies that are innovating with women in mind. So we see it as a way to kind of bridge the gap in women's health investment and the understanding of the lived experiences of female patients in each segment of women's health. And we really appreciate having this incredible, active, and engaged audience here today to be a part of that groundswell of change in women's health. And I want to invite one of our incredible sponsors, Stephanie Sassman, who's a portfolio lead in women's health for Genentech, to give welcome remarks. Take it away, Stephanie.
Great. Thank you, Ali. And, it's nice to see everyone here today. I'm really excited about this session. And, at Genentech and Roche, we are truly on a mission to transform women's health across diseases and to leverage our expertise in developing both diagnostics as well as medicines. And most importantly, really partnering with other stakeholders across the patient journey, whether that be governments or whether that be like innovative creators, such as the people that are here in this forum, that are really bringing forward the innovative solutions that can help bridge care gaps. Because we cannot truly bring forward personalized healthcare if we continue to treat men as the default humans. And I think, with the events, at least in the US in the past few days, it's become very clear that women's health and women's rights are under more threat than they've ever been in my lifetime, probably in all of our lifetimes. And it's also really shocking and unacceptable when we see that women's health outside of oncology accounts for only 1% of R&D funding and healthcare products and services. And it really makes no sense because, as we all know here, women's health is really about population health, Women are accounting for greater than 90% of the healthcare decisions. They're the chief medical officers of their families. They also have a greater likelihood to engage in digital health tools. However, they tend to put themselves last because they're taking care of everybody else. And this is why I'm so glad that Springboard Enterprises and the companies in the Women's Health Coalition are really prioritizing women and how we can put them first. And, you know, on our side, really from discovery all the way through care delivery, we really work to try to keep women at the center of what we do, and really look into how we can deliver care that is more women-centered and personalized. And that starts, you know, by coming from a place of empathy. That's why I'm happy that we're going to be hearing from some of the advocacy organizations as well, because, you know, that's where we can really understand the pain points and the current experience that women are having with healthcare providers and with other stakeholders, and how we can actually improve that and make that better by falling in love with the problems before we fall in love with the solutions that we have. And, you know, we also know when it comes to neurological diseases, and when it comes to just brain health overall, women do face an undue burden. And, you know, whether it's about, you know, the 70% of Alzheimer's sufferers that are women, the caregivers, also for those patients that are going to be majority women, the fact that 3 out of 4 MS patients are women, you know, that women are later to getting diagnosed with things like autism, just the mental health issues that women have been piled on from the pandemic. And, you know, when we are looking into our commitment around neurological conditions, it really spans both medicines and diagnostics, with a longstanding commitment, particularly in MS, Alzheimer's, as well as rare neurological diseases, but really, you know, across the diseases that we treat, whether it be cancer or autoimmune diseases, our teams are thinking about the additional mental health impacts of those diseases on the patients that are having those conditions, because, you know, you can't just necessarily treat the cancer. You also have to think about the well-being of the patient. And so we're very happy to be supporting Springboard. We're really happy to be engaging with all of you, because who better to really lead this charge of putting women at the center than women entrepreneurs? And we need to have the funders as well for those women entrepreneurs. And, you know, we can have important conversations here about how we can bring forward these new health innovations for women, and making sure that that funding is allocated, so that we can support research and development of our tools, our medicines, and our diagnostics with a broad access for women, you know, of all shapes, sizes, ages, races, and backgrounds. So thank you again for all of your efforts, and looking forward to a really exciting session.
Thanks so much, Stephanie. And thanks to the Roche and Genentech teams for your dedication to women's health. Can't be here without all of the work that you guys do. And with that, I want to pass things over to Rachel Braun, Scherl, our incredible moderator for today, to introduce herself and then kick off the panel discussions.
Thank you so much. I'm literally thrilled to be here. Thank you, Stephanie, for allowing this to happen. I'm a veteran of the Springboard. I took a company through there in 2009 and have stayed actively engaged. My focus in my day-to-day work is working in the landscape from menstruation through menopause. And some of the themes that have already been raised are particularly important, because the new narrative, in addition to what Springboard has talked about with how different conditions affect different people, is really looking at a woman as a total person. And you can't look at her brain health without looking at her sexual health, without looking at her bone health. So one of the great things about this program, in addition to speaking from the voice of the patient, is really this broader understanding that we can't look at people or conditions in isolation. And as you know, Stephanie pointed out, if a woman in the house is sick, that doesn't just affect a woman, it affects the entire family from a care provision perspective, from a care access perspective, potentially financially, emotionally. So we're complex, and it's exciting to be jumping in right now with patient advocates. I'm delighted to introduce our first two speakers today, Joy Burkhard, who's the founder and director of 2020 Mom. I just love this language. In Call to Action 2020, Mom has issued a national call to action that sets forth an aggressive new path for solving what some have called one of the biggest health concerns of our time, the silent maternal mental health crisis impacting up to 20% of expecting and new moms. So we're talking about big numbers, and we're talking about big problems. In addition, we're joined by Daneen West, who I'm fascinated to learn how these two roles connect. She's a customer success executive at Cisco, as well as a brain health coach. She's known as the Brain Health Coach online and is often described by her followers as a pioneer, an inspiration, and an angel who arrives just at the right time. So that sounds pretty good. I'm hoping you're knocking on my door soon. And Daneen's Brain Boosting Checklist is a great resource to discover practical tips to heal, protect, and grow the brain. So with that as background, we have people who are in the space of brain health, who are in the space of compassionate care. And as is often the case in these kind of categories, and certainly all the people I deal with in women's health, it was driven by a personal journey, potentially a health issue, or a search for a solution that had been difficult to find. So with that, I'm happy to turn it over. I'm going to start with you, Joy, to ask you a little bit about, sort of how'd you get here? You put this very big and bold goal in front of your organization. What drove this, and how has your personal experience influenced your work?
Yeah, great question. And hello, everyone. Thanks for having me. It's great to be with other very empowered women who are supporting each other. So my journey in addressing the field of maternal mental health started, I say my worlds collided. I was working with a large health insurer, Fortune 50 company, in the quality and management and compliance departments, where I was learning how to sort of scale systemic change in the health delivery system. I had just lost, tragically, my little brother, who was 24 at the time, to suicide. Had watched him battle depression and social anxiety and isolation his whole life, and couldn't find help for him, even when I was in a place in an organization where I should have been able to navigate some care for him. I also had just had my first baby, and with a prior bout of depression myself out of college, didn't realize that I was at higher risk for maternal depression, and wish I had known. Luckily, though, my husband took the night shift and supported my son, who was in the NICU, and sort of hid some of the facts from me, impatient to protect my well-being. But I learned that without his support, I surely would have, fallen off the cliff, as we say, into a deep, dark depression. And so that's why I'm here. At the same time, I was also doing some volunteer work with an organization called the Junior League, which some of you may have in your community here in Los Angeles. Really amazing women doing deep work to support underserved communities, and also had the opportunity to get engaged around legislative policy. And from all of those worlds colliding, 2020 Mom was born to set out to solve for the crisis by the year 2020. And we're still here because there's still more work to do.
The good news, bad news is you have great job security because this is a long-term mission. Well, I'm sure I speak for lots of folks that one of the things that's continually reinforcing about being in this space is how you take personal pain and personal experience to turn it into solutions. And there's a lot happening in the world of women's health right now. So I'd rather start on a high rather than a low, and hear about some of your policy priorities and what are some of the recent successes that you've actually had in maternal mental health.
That's great. I appreciate the question. And really, those of you who have been following the field of mental health or maternal health know that this is the issue, like an issue whose time has finally come. The US is facing one of the highest rates of maternal mortality, the highest rate of maternal mortality in the developing world, and one of only 2 nations with a growing rate. That's not a positive, is it? But because of the attention that's finally been given to the issue of maternal mortality and mental health, in part because of the COVID crisis, we are finally getting our day in the field. One of the most exciting things that's been happening is on the federal legislative policy front, where we have introduced a bill called the Triumph for New Moms Act, which would call for the formation of an intergovernmental agency task force to look at opportunities to collaborate on resources within those agencies like SAMHSA, the mental health agency, the CDC, and other agencies, to make sure we're using resources wisely to develop a national strategic plan to address maternal mental health and issue recommendations and strategies for solutions at the state level, since we know most policy and state implementation work happens at the state level here in the United States. That's an exciting piece of legislation that's still going through the process. You can learn more about how you can support that bill and why it's necessary on our website. Much more we could say about WINS. I think generally the awareness that's come through throughout the last 10 years to the issue, in addition to these crises that have really elevated the issue, have been successes on 2020 Moms' behalf and also the field's behalf.
Yeah, one of the things I find myself saying over and over again is women's health is an overnight sensation that's been centuries in the making. So we're having our moment and we're going to have to take advantage of it. So Daneen, I have a lot of questions. I really want to understand how your role at Cisco connects with your brain health work, but let's start with a very specific brain health question. And in the context of the answer, share a little bit more about your experience. This was something that I didn't know, that brain scans aren't being covered by insurance. First of all, is that generally true? Second of all, why is that? And what can we be doing? Because obviously these are huge issues to rectify that or advocate on behalf of patients to get that covered.
Yeah, absolutely. Great call out. It's specifically called SPECT imaging. It's diagnostic tool. It's nuclear medicine study, and it evaluates the blood flow and activity in the brain. And basically it shows three things. It shows healthy activity, too little activity, or too much activity in the brain. And with it, it accurately identifies underlying brain issues. So ADD, anxiety, depression, seen in a scan, right? So it also SPECT shows damage from concussions because it's showing the blood flow, right? And what's actually going on in the brain. The Amen clinics, they're the ones that have decades of experience here, and they have over 200,000 scans. And it's amazing how when you can get that in place and you can really look at the organ that we're treating when it comes to mental health, that it just creates so many possibilities and more effective treatment and faster healing, right? So it is not covered by insurance today. It is mainly out of pocket, and it is an opportunity. It is an enormous opportunity because we know, as an example, for anxiety, right? When we look at anxiety disorders, one of the most common mental health conditions in America, we have 18% of the population experiencing anxiety. Most common in women. We are almost twice as likely as men to develop anxiety disorders in our lifetime, along with our children, our teens specifically, right? The numbers are rising there in anxiety. When we can show the scan, right? And we can look at the brain imaging, that there's too much activity, as an example, in the basal ganglia, right? That's what sets a person's anxiety level on high. What happens is it's no longer shameful or a character flaw, right? Or bad genes from grandma, right? It's your brain. And what a lot of the research has been showing over the last decade is the brain can heal and the brain can grow, right? You can protect the brain for sure. There's a lot of great opportunities and tips and things we can do to keep our brain healthy. But when we can actually see it, it changes everything, right? Like what always has gotten me, and I remember this example a long time ago and hearing about it, is can you imagine if our our cardiologist didn't look at our heart, or our dentist didn't x-ray our teeth, right? We need to be looking at the brain so that we can get to the next level of care for us all, including our women.
And how does the work you do as a brain health coach connect, if at all, with the work you do at Cisco?
Yeah, well, at Cisco, we have this strength-based test, and we all have it as onboarding. And I'm a pioneer and a provider. Those are my two strengths. That's how I show up at work. And because of that and personal journey that I've had, it started with my child, seeing some struggles there after he was normal. The pediatrician is always he's great. He hit all the milestones, but then things started falling apart when he got to school age. After there was a couple of different diagnoses, because there was a lot of why, like what's causing this? I didn't take it for face value, the label, the diagnosis. And they couldn't answer why. And at Cisco, I've been there 22 years. We've built the internet, right? We secure the internet. So we're always innovating. We're always looking for the root cause. We're always curious and just that growth mindset, move forward, right? So I took what I've learned, what I do in work, and really went to problem solving for my child to figure out what's causing this. And after a lot of years of research and therapies and thousands of dollars spent, I figured out it was the brain, right? So when you get the answer and you know what to pinpoint, today, he's no longer in special ed. He doesn't even have an IEP anymore at school.
Explain to people who aren't familiar with that acronym, what that means.
Yeah, an individualized education program. So when maybe they give more time on tests, or they'll pull them out of class for speech and, extra services in the public school system. And there's, it's a formal document, and it is a pretty intense document where it's required for those extra services based on that diagnosis, right? So he had that. He even had a self-contained classroom in the early years. And because of what we did around a brain healthy lifestyle, he no longer has a label of Asperger's. He no longer has the label of sensory processing disorder. He no longer has the label of ADD, right? None of that actually exists. He doesn't have those symptom clusters, right? Like that's often
which in and of themselves have responses and stigmas associated with them. So
right.
What do you do? So Daneen, her son, her organization, that's an ecosystem where people are being supported, where that conversation seems to be happening more often than it might in other organizations. I imagine that is not the case in most places. So how do you, in terms of what your mission is, how do you break down those barriers to access? Maybe you have a firebrand of a mom or an executive like Daneen. What are you seeing in your work, how you break down the barriers to access, which I think start with conversations and having the language around even understanding that there's a problem and where to go for some help in diagnosis and treatment?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's definitely conversation points around awareness that we need to bring up, that mental health disorders are brain health disorders, right? Just like Alzheimer's are. And then there really are some payment levers, as you hit on with your question to Daneen about why aren't insurers covering SPECT scans, for example, that can help us close gaps in mental health care and perhaps brain health care more broadly. And you had asked the question of Daneen, and I'd like to attempt to answer a question as well, given my 24 years actually with a large healthcare insurer. I loved my work there and also learned a lot about the health delivery system. And what we find is that if research isn't conducted on these sort of novel, if you will, approaches, even brain scans for mental health disorders, through university institutions, for example, and instead sort of led by those who are looking to draw income, right? Not nonprofit organizations or universities, that we sometimes can call into question motives and dismiss the potential real opportunity with an approach or treatment. One of the things I'd like to highlight that the coalition is working on with support from a federal government affairs organization is looking at the development of something called the U.S. Treatment Services Diagnostic and Treatment Services Task Force. Those of you who remember the work with the Affordable Care Act might recall that the U.S. Preventive Services Task Force was created under the Affordable Care Act to call out which preventive services, screenings, and interventions should be covered by payers, insurers, and public and private insurers. We believe that something like a U.S. Diagnostic and Treatment Services Task Force could really benefit the field for these reasons and more. And I'm sure many of those of you who are developing solutions to solve for opportunities in women's health would be excited about that, to know that there's an external entity that's looking at research, identifying opportunities for additional research, and helping to make decisions on what payers should cover.
Okay. Well, it's great to hear that we're making some forward progress. And I think that's, again, one of the experiences you have frequently when you're in this space is it's incredible highs and lows, great successes, and then, downturns that, we all feel and then want to get back on the horse and try again. So in terms of solutions, we're talking broadly about these are big problems. They affect lots of people. They affect lots of women. They have life-disturbing, maybe life-ending implications. So if we're trying to get down to the patient level, Daneen, what are some of the solutions or options or treatments, if you will, tell me the right term to use, that you're working on or that Cisco's working on or that you share with your patients as a brain health coach? What can people hold on to if they think they're experiencing this? I mean, we're all here as business people and interested in the space, but getting down to the patient piece, which is what this segment is all about, what should people know? What should they do? What questions should they be asking? And where should they go if they want to start a process of figuring it out and getting treatment?
I think first and foremost, there's some basic fundamental things that we all should be doing that maybe we're told to do by our doctors, but doing it and actually executing might not be what we're used to. So as an example, sleep, right? So we all sleep. Some of us sleep better than others. I've been tracking my sleep since 2018. And for a lot of good reasons. It was only in 2015 that researchers found that the brain has a separate lymphatic system that clears away the neurotoxins that build up each day. So you can think of it as like a dishwasher for the brain, and it only works while we're asleep. And if you don't get enough restorative sleep, you feel it, right? We all have felt jet lag, or if we've had a bad night's sleep, right? It's hard to think, right, and function. So I've worn an Oura ring since 2018, and I get my data, I get my readiness score based on my sleep, right? So I track it, I measure it, and it really gives me personal insights, and it helps me predict, it helps me understand and just really make better decisions day in and day out that affect my mental health, right? Because I strive to think and focus and just be my best each and every day. But if I didn't get a good sleep, those neurotoxins are still there and they're not washed away. So that's something just fundamental, right? Also, hydration. 80% of our brain is water, right? If we are dehydrated, even by 2%, it affects our cognition, right? So these are just some of the basic things that do affect our anxiety level, depression, right? There's a lot of fallout when we don't have some of these basics along with healthy eating, brain boosting foods. When it's more complex, more serious, right? The basics are down. That is where I would recommend a brain scan, SPECT imaging, right? Looking at the brain changes everything, because you can actually see the areas of the brain that are overactive, that are underactive, and it explains the symptoms, right? Often the symptoms that you talk about and how you're feeling and what you're thinking and how you're acting is directly points to how your brain is functioning, right?
Okay.
So
I'm
getting
going to
that
jump
clear
in
picture.
now because there's so many questions. The chat is heating up with all kinds of questions. Alex, do you want me to pull them out or do you?
Yeah,
Okay,
for sure.
so many questions and comments and lots of desire to talk further. So one of the questions that came up, hi Sophia, is the person who asked the question is a practicing physician and an entrepreneur. How do we manage this crossover, if you will, between medical care, brain recommendations and advocacy, because there is a difference and it requires different skills. So I'll ask you first, Joy, you have to know a lot about the brain and about mental health, but you're not a physician. How do you walk that line to make sure you're, to use that expression from the insurance company, that you're staying in your lane and that you're encouraging people to seek care from a professional when that might be merited?
Absolutely. So we're 23 Mom Functions, and we're actually going through a name change. I welcome feedback on potential names. If anyone loves branding, we'd love to partner with you. But we're really operating like a think tank or an advocacy organization. So our services don't include providing clinical direction, even though you heard me talk about the system, the health delivery system, right? Our services really are about closing gaps in maternal mental health, and we know we have to do that through policy levers. So just to explain that. And then the question was about, I think it was about how do
you help people navigate between getting information and identifying resources and actually accessing medical care when they think that might be merited or suggested?
I'm gonna take that question and answer it in an interesting way. I think is that our healthcare delivery system is not routinely, and I think you all have probably experienced this too. And if you haven't, you're lucky. Routinely screening, providing a questionnaire or a brain scan, right? And for that matter, screening to identify potential mental health disorders in our population. And there's a variety of barriers that exist as to why that's happening, that we are unpacking and have policy solutions developed for. And so, we're really advocating for providers to be the partner that educate women on mental health disorders routinely, and that are empowered to deliver, to screen, to identify, and feel like they can deliver basic mental health care and have referral pathways for experts like psychiatrists. We have a super shortage of psychiatrists in the country, and significant workforce shortages for mental health providers in general in the country. And our bifurcated mental health and medical systems, that means two different payment processes, make this an incredibly complex system. We're actually advocating for what we say is killing the carve out. Our brain should be reimbursed to providers who are treating it, just like medical services are. So I didn't quite answer the question, but hopefully that was a helpful insight around what we're doing and what we're advocating for.
And over to Daneen, how do you, first of all, thank you for the complexities of payment and who gets paid and where the money flows is obviously huge and important in every area of healthcare. And we should probably have a week-long retreat on that, if not longer. So Daneen, where do you draw the line between advice and counsel versus medical care? When do you make that shift? When do you recommend that someone sees a physician?
I think of myself as an advocate, I raise awareness, and there's a lot of questions that come up and a lot of concerns saying my doctor doesn't understand, or I was given this antidepressant, right? But I really wasn't asked a lot of questions, and I'm not sure if this pill is right for me. And what I what I like to do is just raise the knowledge and the awareness. There's often avenues that maybe are not covered, right? The functional path, a holistic path, looking at gut health, looking at tests, looking at not the normal US range, but what is really optimal health where you can get from a functional practitioner. So, I make them aware how to go and find one in their area, right? So it's
Okay.
more of directing.
Yep.
Now, do I have a primary physician? Absolutely. Do they have a place in the partnership, my community of care? Absolutely, right? But I do find that often the root cause and really getting to answers and relief doesn't always happen at my primary.
Okay. Thank you so much. A lot of great discussion, a lot of enthusiastic listeners, other events that are being mentioned on the same topic in the chat. So make sure to take a look at that. Thank you, Joy and Daneen, so much for your perspective and willingness to share your personal experience and how that's translated into your advocacy work. So we're closing the chapter on that, and we're now going over to founders and funders. Our objective today for this conversation is really to amplify the business case and the market opportunity for women's brain health and mental health care by hearing from companies innovating in this area. And we have a real treat that we have an investor in one of the companies that's on the panel and really understanding how that comes to be, but really focused around patient-centric approaches to innovation. So with pleasure, I introduce Tracey Dooley, who's a partner at Avestria Ventures. When I've known Tracey, I know the organization, but as I was reading again about her background, the only expression I could come up with was Renaissance woman. She literally does all these amazing things that you don't often see in the same person. She's an engineer, an investor, a Stanford trained physician, a banker, a veteran of large pharma, and she's a classically trained violinist. So I think there's a whole lot of things you can ask. And I'm sure all those things, if we did a scan, her brain would certainly look different than mine. So thank you so much for joining. Shailja Dixit, who is the CEO of Curio Digital Therapeutics. In addition to Shailja speaking out about the company, she is also the recipient, or if you will, a partner with Avestria. Avestria has made an investment in Curio, and Shailja is an accomplished healthcare and pharmaceutical physician executive with more than 15 years of experience with all the big pharma names you can think of, with experience with consulting, payers, and provider groups, global experience. And this was my favorite line. The way they describe Curio is as a ray of sunshine in women's health management. And I would challenge anyone to find a company focused on general health that would put that on their website as something so inspiring and where we're trying to get to. And last but not least, Karen Crow is co-founder and CEO of NeuroGeneces. She was part of the Springboard 2021 digital cohort. And again, like so many people, Karen experienced a problem, was drawn to find a better solution than what she could find available, and came up with not only a solution, but a company in response to that. So Karen, I'm going to start with you. Your background you describe as you were sandwiched between two challenges, really the sandwich generation with a young son and a mother who was showing signs of aging. Describe that and how that gave birth to what you're currently doing at Curio. I'm sorry, Curio, doing at NeuroGeneces.
Yeah, sure. Well, thank you for having me. Yes, I ended up in that sandwich situation where my mom was diagnosed with Alzheimer's and I had a son that had a sleep disorder. And so being the type A person, even though I had no medical background, was not an engineer, but I am type A. And so learned everything I could about sleep science and neurodegenerative diseases, and found a very interesting intersection between sleep and neuroscience. And that really was the launch point for NeuroGeneces. What we do is objectively measure and improve brain health, and we do that via sleep analysis. So we look at, we're developing a sleep wearable with EEG, also blood flow analysis, HR analysis, And we have, we profile that against, well, let me back up. The EEG itself analyzes and measures the neuronal communication, signal strength in the brain. So how well the brain is communicating with other parts of the brain. So we measure that and look at it across healthy individuals so that we can get a sense of kind of what the age-adjusted brain age is for that individual. And so that helps us understand whether someone is showing accelerated brain age for their age and gender. And we know then that something's going on. It might be neurodegenerative diseases, it might be some other causes, but we know that their brain function is less than what it should be. And the beauty of it is that just like we all wear our Oura rings or our Fitbits, if you wear our headband at night, we can give an assessment of risk of where you are so that you can identify the neurodegenerative aspects show up in brain function. They think up to 2 decades before anyone shows any cognitive symptoms.
And the idea would be early detection for early treatment?
That's exactly right. And the early treatment might be as simple as behavioral. So, you know, talking before about getting good sleep, getting exercise, et cetera. But then you can see and track over time whether you're having an impact, just like you check your cholesterol every year when you go into the doctor, check your brain health and your brain function every year when you go in to see your doctor, to see if you're on track for where your age gender should be, or if you're falling behind. And if so, you can start expediting and escalating to more diagnostics or whatever.
Thank you so much. So Shailja, I want you to share a little bit about what Curio is doing. Taking a different approach. We will then ask Tracey to come in and talk a little bit about Avestria and what was appealing to her and to the fund about your approach. But tell us a little bit about Curio and how you came to create this company.
Thank you, Rachel, and thanks for inviting us here. Curio focuses, as you said, across women's life cycle during the different stages on their mental health. So our goal is to focus on mental health across women's life cycle and provide the solutions that are digitally affordable and scalable, to take care of mental health. Because I think Joy was saying earlier, or one of the speakers, we don't have enough mental health providers. There's a shortage. Access is a huge issue. Stigma is a huge issue, and affordability of these solutions is a huge issue. This is true. Like from a payment perspective, these are two, as if our mind is not attached to our body, right? These are like two separate way we look at it.
Sometimes it might feel that way, right?
right. So that's that's the whole purpose of Curio. We deliver like solutions through our digital platform. Call it digital therapeutics, which are scientific, evidence-based to take care of women's, mental health and go across. And our first product is focused on maternal mental health. It came from my own experience because I had a fairly tough time, but my toughest time was not necessarily postpartum depression itself, but the problem was getting back to work. So, when a woman is coming back to work after her pregnancy, most of us are at the time where our career is going up, or in a 30s and all, when you are in your middle of your career, and you are supposed to function back when you come back in 100% capacity, what you left, while your life has extremely changed when you come back to your work, right? So there is nothing today that takes care of those aspects, and that's our focus.
Okay, terrific. So we're hearing of anyone who's paying attention. We know that the financial markets are battering us around a little bit, that we're hearing all of this about, people are slow, funds are slower to invest, they're saving their money for their follow-ons. But here we have, a great pair. Tracey, tell us about the thesis for Avestria and what it was specifically about Shailja as a founder and Curio as a company that sparked your interest and ultimately your investment.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you, Rachel, and the Springboard community for having us. I really think that, this is just an incredible ecosystem of folks who have been focused on this really incredibly important issue, right? So maybe I'll start a little bit with Avestria's thesis. And it's sort of tied into my personal journey. But as Rachel mentioned, right, I started out in clinical medicine. And, when you think about how clinicians are trained, right, we're not actually getting a sex and gender based view of this, right? So we have what is essentially unisex medicine, right? And so, but women are not small men biologically at the cellular level, right? And so it stands to reason that we should not, patients are not a homogeneous population, right? And biological sex is one of the easiest ways to stratify, but we really haven't been doing that apart from perhaps the last few years. So it's really important to think about this as, people love to talk about data, right? But if you have great data, then you can generate better insights, and then you can really move the needle as far as delivering improved outcomes, right? And I think when we really center the patient, when we really center the individual and what their journey is and how do we improve those outcomes for them, that's sort of the holy grail of what we look at in healthcare, right? So I think, but all these other things are in service of doing that. And so from a training standpoint, right, I think there's a lot of education to be done there. But we've also seen, sort of throughout my career, Linda and I met a dozen years ago at Novartis, but we've also seen that folks who are underinvested in and sort of these areas that are, and therapeutic areas that are underinvested in have the opportunity for outsized returns. And overwhelmingly, we see that as, unfortunately, in female founders and in health of women, right? A little bit about how we define the health of women. We look at it as not just reproductive health, obviously, because women are more than our reproductive organs. But that's one of the things that people love to think about because it's an obvious difference between, women and men. But areas where women are impacted, exclusively, so things like ovarian cancer or menopause, right, or pregnancy, and then areas where women are impacted differently, like neurodegenerative disease or autoimmune disease, and that's significantly disproportionately women are overrepresented in those areas. And then things like cardiovascular disease, right? The number one killer of women, but women do not behave like men physiologically. And so there's an enormous amount of opportunity to really deliver personalized learnings there, right? And so we think across the spectrum of any area of healthcare, right? It's really important to think about, women's health as an area where we can really improve and innovate. And I will say that it's also important to really think about the intersectionality of this, right? So it doesn't just start and stop with women, right? We need to think about race as a social determinant of health, right? We need to think about all these other intersectional areas, right? Where we're really stratifying and we're really getting to the promise of what personalized medicine can do for us, right? And with a focus on outcomes. So that's a little bit of a broad area, but so Avestria is an early stage investor. We focus primarily in seed and A in the areas of women's health and female founders. It can be either or, but because we feel like that's sort of the inflection point where a lot of early stage companies have a challenge to, move through those early stages and then get funded by, larger company or larger funds that have the ability to sort of put in large amounts of capital, and then so folks can just go ahead and execute. Right?
So let's turn to Curio specifically. It's a very broad thesis with real focus on women's health. What was it about the business proposition that Curio is presenting and Shailja as a leader, so people have some understanding of a couple of things? One, what caught your attention about what she's doing that's different from a business perspective? And then as a person, many people on the phone are often seeking funding. What did she do that caught your attention and resulted in an investment?
Absolutely. Well, as we think about the stakeholders, right, there's numerous stakeholders here, right? Obviously, the patient, physician, payer, health system, right? And I think it's really important that you need to build with all of those in mind, right? Healthcare, like our bodies, is complex, right? And so being able to navigate in that arena is also complex. And I think what we really valued when we spoke to Shailja is that she had built Curio in a way that took all these stakeholders into account, right? And, she had a focus specifically on being able to deliver improved outcomes in Medicaid populations, which I think is really important. We believe that it's, you need to go where the biggest unmet need is. And that's also an opportunity to deliver, a real change in outcomes. And so I think that was something that was incredibly compelling. The way that she thought about the physician workflow, the way that she thought about the patient engagement, the way that she thought about the payer landscape, right, and the value there, all those pieces were in place, right? So it is specific to the company, but I think what we saw there and what was compelling for us to invest was that she had thought about all these pieces, right, based upon her experience, her team's experience, right, and really done her homework to really to put that together in one package. And I think that that was something that we see very rarely, and that was something that was incredibly important. And of course, really think about the unmet need in maternal mental health was enormous and something that we hadn't seen addressed significantly.
Thank you. And some of these funding issues are obviously universal across whatever space you're trying to raise financing for. Karen, you took a different approach and you received a National Science Foundation grant. Talk about that process and how it specifically was available for the work you were doing in, neurocognitive health.
Sure. We started certainly looking at the investor funding pathway. We got caught a little bit in that we weren't life science. We were kind of more consumer wellness. We had a hardware component, which at the time, there had been some very well publicized busts in neuro hardware. And we got kind of caught up in some of those things. So we were unable to get a lead. And so we kind of doubled down on going for SBIR and STTR funding. And so we really focused on building our research team out and pursued. So to date, we've had phase 1, phase 2 of DoD funding, also NSF funding. We're now pursuing NIH funding. And that has been a much more, it's enabled us to get to the point where we are de-risking the key things that a lot of the investors had challenges with. Can we get to our hardware to be a prototype? Can we get it adopted by several partners? And this funding is enabling us to do that without any dilution. And so at that point, we hope to come back, to the investor community once all this chaos is kind of settling down, and we'll be in a
Can you tell us when that's going to be, just while we're at it?
Yes, I wish I could. Yeah, we're just hanging tight right now, but we'll be eligible for 1-to-1 matching with government money for every dollar we raise from investors. So that's when we'll really do our first seed round. So that worked for us. And then that will give us the ability to kind of have enough data behind us that we can enter with clinical trials or study trials. So if we don't pursue FDA from the get-go, we will have enough credibility and proof of outcomes underneath our belts to get adoption. So that was our path that we took.
Okay. I don't want anyone who's listening to be misled. It sounds much easier on a 25-minute call to say we raised venture capital and we got government funding. These are long, difficult processes for those who are just embarking on those or in the middle of it. So Shailja, we know one story, we know one of your investors, but I'm sure there have been challenges and barriers. What have been some of the challenges you've faced, specifically because you're focused on mental health? What is some of the pushback you've gotten or partnerships you hope to develop that just really never got off first base because of the topic? And we see that a lot in other areas of certainly sexual and reproductive health.
Yeah, so thank you for asking that question. So this is true, there are very few, thank God the numbers are growing, investors who are carving out and their charter is to invest in women's health related issues, right? I mean, we have been talking to Tracey and Avestria for a year or so. So their investment happened last year. But think about it, things are a little bit on a upward trend, but they have not been enough. There's still not enough. So that's the That's one of the biggest challenge, right? Those who understand and those who are willing to invest in it. Second aspect is, I think, we had challenges. It was not easy. Thankfully, we had some high net worth individuals to start with, and then Avestria came, who understood the unmet need, because clearly there is an unmet need. And initially I did struggle to communicate the unmet need, because, the big question was, oh, we never realized that mental health for women is different. We never realized that postpartum, you'll be surprised how many big employers I talk to, they don't even track postpartum depression. We just finished a very big, fairly big market research. It's not even tracked, so there is not even a clear understanding of how big a problem it is. So hence there is a lack of understanding, lack of funding, and we did struggle with that. But we were lucky enough to have some high net worth individuals and Avestria understand the issues, understand the women's health related, mental health related issues, and specifically fund women founders. So that's what I would say. And then we are now, we have Mount Sinai and some other investors who have come on board. Right now we are commercializing. We have already launched in a very large OBGYN network. So things are looking different, but definitely starting is, as you said, not as easy as it sounds. It did take us some time to get to that. But
in a 25-minute webinar, it sounds very easy and straightforward. Stephanie, I wanted to go back to you. You had shared a statistic about when Tracey mentioned that biological sex, the bias is built in from the beginning in terms of what we're focused on investing. How, from a perspective of a large company, do you try to respond to that and make sure that you're not promoting sort of that same pattern, which doesn't really help anybody in terms of outcomes?
No, agree. It's a great point. And this is why, we've been engaging in discussions with our scientists, right, about the animals that they choose to, incorporate in their research. And, an understanding of, and it's required now to get European Commission funding, as well as for a lot of the more prestigious journals for publishing, to explain, why you chose a certain sex of animal and how those results are relevant. So it really starts in the very beginning, as we think about it, even at the bench level. Another thing that we work to do is to promote more female scientists, right? Because we know that they are more likely to ask the questions like, why are 80% of autoimmune disease patients women? Are there things going on that we should be thinking about with the hormones or with the chromosomes? Or other things like that. And then also, in the work that we do in terms of advocating with partnerships, right? Even with universities, right? The discussions around, how are they thinking about making sure that there's a balance of their women in leadership. And so we try to look into our own shop and also like how we're analyzing our data, right? Are we looking at a sex-based analysis to our data in an appropriate way? And we're beginning an effort there where we're prioritizing where are the disease areas where we really need to think about the sex-based approach and how might we do that in the best way. Obviously there are regulatory requirements that are always met, but oftentimes sex is not really, as a biological variable, is not analyzed in a robust enough way. And so we're trying to be an advocate externally, but also look inside internally as to what we can do, and then also advocate and talk about it. We just did a session last week with the HBA. We did a session with them last year. And we have something coming up in October with DIA, which I'm happy to put into the link. Because there's been a lot of discussion about race and ethnicity, and it's incredibly important, and it should not in any way go by the wayside. However, we do know the sex of the patients that are in our studies, and there's a lot of pioneering work that we can do with that right now that will also maybe teach us and show the way as to how we can do more with race and ethnicity.
Rachel, you're muted.
Thank you. Karen, same question that I asked to Shailja. What are some of the challenges you faced? You obviously found a solution with a new approach to fundraising, which as I mentioned, wasn't easy, but looks easy in a short presentation. What were some of the other barriers you bumped into? You talked about this. I use the expression like you're a tweener. You're not, it's hard to do pattern recognition because you didn't fit squarely into anyone's vision of what they were trying to invest in. How do you manage around that? And how do you find a way to communicate how you're going to fit into what they're trying to solve?
You're right. We did get kind of caught in between the life science versus consumer wellness space, and also hardware, software. We never wanted to develop hardware, but we couldn't find a hardware device that had the high enough quality to meet what we needed to do because our analysis was so precise. And so we ended up having to develop hardware. So we're really a hardware enabled software AI play. But everyone got kind of tripped up in the hardware part of it. So the first thing we did was, quite honestly, listen, because we didn't have as much experience as the people that we were sitting around the table with. And in some ways that helped us either figure out what were the things that we were missing in our storyline that maybe they were seeing and we weren't, and we didn't want to put our heads in the sand. But then we also realized that everyone looks at it through their own lens. At the end of the day, we had to figure out our own path. Mm-hmm. And so we're still trying to navigate that a little bit on the life science versus, FDA or non-FDA. And for us, the issue is more around, what is the right time and what is the right level of, what are the types of claims that we want to make, not yes or no. And so mm-hmm. we're still on that kind of pathway of figuring some of that out. I do think that at the end of the day, there is some unconscious bias in the world out there. There was a study that was referenced once at Avestria that said that, a female and a male kind of founder that presented the exact same pitch deck were given very different questions in response. And some of those questions were tagged as either, supportive and positive versus challenging and defensive. And
yeah, it's really fascinating research. If anyone hasn't seen it, by Dana Cans from London School of Economics.
So, I think there is a little of that there that is just kind of the nature of the beast for now.
Okay, thank you. And Tracey, as we get to a close, one of the things you're obviously looking for is a return, as an investor, is a return. Can you share some of the numbers that you look at when you think about the opportunity behind mental health that gets you excited to, invest in companies like Curio and have you look at maybe other adjacent mental health companies?
Yeah, absolutely. I will say that I think, so it's going to be different for each company, but I think when you start with the unmet need and the market size, right? And then you have very rigorously thought out assumptions around what your ability to penetrate that market might be, right? So I think it's more sort of believing in that financial model, right? And then thinking about what is the potential exit. I will say on the flip side, right, when you've looked at some of the high flying mental health companies, and to be aware of this, right? Cerebral, just laid off, had huge layoffs today, right? We've seen a number of folks like Talkspace and BetterHelp, like they're being investigated. So I think that there's a lot where the metrics are not necessarily indicative of, so the more traditional growth metrics are not necessarily indicative of something that's going to be a sustainable long-term business that's going to generate better outcomes. So we really focus on what are the clinical outcomes, right? And the fact that Shailja's going through the FDA, the fact that she's got a 1,200 person clinical trial, right? That was compelling to us. And we've been looking at that data and the improvements. So I think it's much more a question of quality and not quantity. So I would leave folks with that.
Well, with that as a close, I want to thank all of our speakers, Daneen, Joy, Tracey, Shailja, Karen. Thank you to the folks at Springboard and Stephanie from Roche. This is the beginning, I hope, of what is a much longer, extensive, complex, multifaceted conversation, and really appreciate you all taking the time to share your perspectives today.
Thanks so much, Rachel. And just to quickly close us out in terms of a policy update, Rachel, if you could share, it's perfect. You'll see on the screen here, there are two bills listed, S1692 and HR 3354, one in the Senate, of course, and one in the House. These are really the two bills that have seen the most press attention, greatest concentration of co-sponsors. There's 14 on the Senate side and 40 on the House. And there are a number of, related to dementia and general brain health legislation, but the gorilla in the room really seems to be Alzheimer's. And so there's a significant amount of research funding, member attention going here. There's a bill associated with Alzheimer's caregivers as well. It's called S56 in the Senate, and in the House Resolution 1474, introduced by Maxine Waters and Chris Smith and Amy Klobuchar and Susan Collins in the Senate, giving much needed relief to our caregivers, as noted earlier today. That's so related to a great number of conditions in the brain and mental health space. And so for those that are particularly inclined or have an existing relationship with their member of Congress, you can call your member or representative, see if they're a sponsor of this bill. If they are not, either way, put pressure on them to become one and to stay a sponsor or a supporter of this bill. As we've seen in recent news, you really need to keep putting the pressure on our members of Congress to stay dedicated to areas of women's health in general. And so you'll see with these two bills, they were introduced in May of last year, but have not seen much movement through committee. So we need to keep the pressure on leadership, as always, to do, support and sponsor this legislation and keep the needle moving forward. And then in terms of federal funding, and some updates on what was enacted in 2022, we saw a great increase in Alzheimer's and dementia research at the NIH. Of course, a $289 million increase from the year before. Each year since 2015, the NIH presents a professional judgment budget, sometimes referred to as a bypass budget, for additional federal funds needed for research to effectively treat or prevent Alzheimer's disease and related cognitive impairments, with the goal of doing that by 2025. And so each year, these bypass budget reports feature highlights of recent advances toward that goal. And actually, for the fiscal year of 2023, they're asking for an additional $226 million. So we're seeing, again, the gorilla in the room seems to be Alzheimer's, a condition that disproportionately impacts women. So a $3.7 billion total funding ask for the fiscal year 2023. A great increase from 2022. And so that's, going across a number of areas of developing effective and less invasive diagnostic and detection methods. I know that we talked a lot about early detection today, enhancing diversity and reducing health disparities, looking for new drug candidates and repurposing those already FDA approved drugs for dementia. So we're just really looking at a number of areas in Alzheimer's and related dementia research that needs much more attention as we go through 2022 into 2023. And so if you have any questions on getting involved with reaching out to your member of Congress, any additional questions you have on anything related to where attention is on the Hill and where it needs to be going, please reach out to me or our friends at G2G Consulting. They can help with anything legislative or policy related to, of course, keep the needle moving forward on women's health. And so with that, I just want to close out for today and, again, say thank you to all of our incredible speakers for joining us here today, and amplifying the patient's voice, and shining a light on what needs to be innovated in women's mental health and cognitive health as well. And so we have a number of events coming up coast to coast. The second week of July for Springboard will be in Boston on July 11th. For a dolphin tank focused on life sciences and healthcare, and quickly moving all the way over to the West Coast in San Francisco for a pitch event focused on Black and Latina founders in the tech space. And so if you can join either of those in person, that'd be amazing. We're so excited to see you in Boston or in San Francisco. And then with that, our next event will be in July, focused on the much needed topic of reproductive health. So we hope to see you there as well. So thank you, everybody. Please reach out with any questions, stay connected, keep the momentum going, and we'll see you in July.